Today, it's time for me to take accountability. When Marvel superheroes first came out, I released this video where I took a brand new approach to predicting how good cards would be in Draft and Sealed. Anytime a new set comes out, tons of people do these awesome comprehensive videos estimating how good every card will be in Limited. But when I sat down to do the same thing, something really didn't sit right with me. My channel is all about using data to get better at Limited, so I wanted to find a way to anchor my evaluations of the cards in information that we actually know for sure. So here's how the approach worked. I started with a new card, like Hero in Training, and I found examples of the most similar cards that I could in the recent history of Limited Magic. In this case, I compared Hero in Training to Inspiring Overseer, which was slightly different. It had flying, you gain 1 life when it enters, and it had 1 less toughness. But I figured that at least by grounding my evaluation in a pretty similar card, I would be doing better than just looking at the card and seeing how it makes me feel or what thoughts it inspires about how it might play out. I looked at 17lands.com and I found the game in hand win rate of the most similar cards in the past, in this case, Inspiring Overseer. Game in hand win rate is the probability that you go on to win the game after you draw that card into your hand in the course of a game, and that probability is classified into letter grades on 17 lands. In the case of Inspiring Overseer, it was a phenomenal common, landing at an A-. I docked some points from Hero in Training because it didn't have flying, very importantly, and it didn't gain you a life. So I guessed that it was a B. Well, hey, look at that. If you go right now to 17 lands for Marvel Premierdraft and look at where Hero in Training ended up landing, it was exactly a B. So let's wrap up the video right here. It looks like I hit the grades right on the head, 100% accuracy, and see you tomorrow. No, what we're going to do today is we're going to audit my grading. We're going to see what went well and what went not so well. And particularly with Hobbit spoiler season already done, I am going to be beginning a series starting tomorrow, grading every single common and uncommon in the Hobbit using this method. So we're going to evaluate what we want to tweak for the Hobbit spoiler season. So without further ado, here is a plot showing the performance of my grading system. On the horizontal axis here, I have my prediction about how good a given card would be. So this vertical line is a card that I graded expected to have a D. This vertical line is a card that I expected to be a B+. On the vertical axis, did I say vertical before? That would be horizontal. This one's the vertical axis. This is the actual grade that it ended up getting. So this card that I thought would have a D, it ended up being a C- card. Here's a card that I thought, this card that I thought would be a B+, it ended up being a B in the actual data. This line, the y equals x line, is the line where I absolutely nailed it exactly on the head. So for example, here's one that I thought would be a B-, and it exactly was a B-. Okay, so how did I do overall? So on the one hand, there are 5 cards out of 31 grades assigned that I predicted absolutely perfectly, right on the nose. As a side note, it is already a downside that I want to fix next time that I only assigned 31 total grades. Basically, I thought I'm going to only focus on commons and I'm going to only talk about the ones that have a clear analog in the recent history of Magic. I kind of think that's a little bit chicken. If this is a grading system that's supposed to be maybe one step more objective than just looking at the cards and making an estimate based on whatever it triggers in my brain, then it should be universal. It should be something that I'm willing to apply to everything and not just apply to the safe cases where it clearly applies best. So definitely starting with my Hobbit evaluations tomorrow, I'm going to be doing every single common and uncommon, not just 31 grades. So that's failure number 1. But now I want to look at the successes. So for the ones that I absolutely got right on the nose, I'm going to play my reasoning back for you and let's see some of the things that went right. And store up the good feelings and the positivity and the success you get from that, because after that, we're going to watch back my biggest misses of the format. Okay, so we already heard about Hero in Training, which was the first card that I got exactly right. Now let's hear my reasoning for Panther Pounce, the second of 5 cards that I got right. That down there is me from the past in the original grading video. Green border means me from the present reacting. Got that? Let's go. This reminded me of a lot of stuff, so I'm going to tick through some spells here from the last few years. First off, there has been a series of spells with the following abilities. Acrobatic Leap from LCI is one example. 1 white for an instant. Target creature gets +1/+3 and gains flying until end of turn, untap it. So we haven't seen anything quite like Panther Pounce. This is a new combination. Investigate, +1/+0, flying, and untap as a combat trick. So we're going to have to cobble it together from a few different places. Acrobatic Leap is one style that we've seen a lot though, so there's some good info here. Now the differences are Acrobatic Leap gives an extra +3 toughness. However, it is down an entire clue token. It does not give you a card in compensation. So I would consider Acrobatic Leap probably worse than Panther Pounce. I'm just guessing the clue token is usually better than the extra 3 toughness. Having said that, how did Acrobatic Leap do? It was a C, middle of the road, but that's not the only time that we've seen this card. So I'm going to take that C, I'm going to put it on the board, and we're going to keep a running tally on the right of your screen there of the letter grades that we've given to cards so far that resemble Panther Pounce. So a functional, not reprint, preprint, I guess, of Acrobatic Leap was Escape from Orthanc. So same thing, target creature gets +1/+3 and gains flying until end of turn, untap it. This was in Lord of the Rings. It got a C- in that context. And we also saw this in Kaldheim. Wings of the Cosmos, same card. In Kaldheim, it got a B-. Okay, so that's the Acrobatic Leap, or we should probably call it the Wings of the Cosmos category. It also reminded me of something that green gets pretty often, which is a little bit worse than Acrobatic Leap. It's a green 1-mana instant that gives a creature +1/+3 and reach and untaps it. So High Stride in Bloomburrow was an example. In Bloomburrow, it was a C-. And Leaping Ambush is another example from Wilds of Eldraine. In that one, it was a C. Then there are 2 more I wanted to mention here, but I'm not going to explicitly include them in the average, just kind of as a similar flavor to get our heads in the right space. Riverguard's Reflexes from Lorwyn Eclipsed cost a whole extra mana. It was 1 and a white, but it was the same kind of untap a creature combat trick for white. Target creature gets +2/+2 and gains first strike. Untap it. And in that set, it got a D+, but I mean, I do want to emphasize it did cost a whole extra mana. Then another card that this really made me think of, Panther Pounce, which I'm betting the design was partly inspired by, Toxin Analysis. This was a really cool combat trick from MKM that was the only other combat trick I could think of that allows you to investigate while making your creature better at combat. So this was a 1-mana black instant. Target creature gains Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn, investigate. So this is also 1-mana investigate, and maybe your creature gets to kill something. You'll notice also, similar to Panther Pounce, Toxin Analysis does not help something survive. Panther Pounce does not give any extra toughness like Acrobatic Leap does, but it does make it better at killing things in Toxin Analysis's case by giving it Death Touch, in Panther Pounce's case by giving it an extra power. So I think that comparison is illustrative, and Toxin Analysis also got a C-, which is the modal thing that we saw for the Acrobatic Leap or High Stride style of card. So I'm going to say Panther Pounce, I'm going into the set expecting this to be about a C- as well. Okay, so here's what I think was so successful about that. And by the way, just in case you doubt me, Panther Pounce over here on the left, it is a C- on 17 lands, so as predicted. And so what I think was so successful about that was the subjectivity actually after the averaging, right? So if you look at the averages over there on the right of the screen, these are all of the cards that look the most like Panther Pounce, a 1-mana trick that gives a bit of extra power and untaps something. And technically the average is higher than C-, right? So I came into this analysis thinking the whole point is objectivity. So I should really just not do that much original thinking, just compile the average of previous grades and make that my prediction for this card's grade. But the average of these on the right would be closer to like C, maybe it's a little above C. Well, it's a little below C, but more C than C-, right? But because I made this chain of reasoning that connected Panther Pounce to Toxin Analysis and felt that Toxin Analysis was actually the most similar card that there is in terms of its function in a game of limited magic, not just a literal string similarity of the text box. That I think is really the secret sauce of how I hit this on the head, because I kept seeing C, C-, C, C-. Toxin Analysis was the most similar carding with C-, so it's just a great tiebreaker. And by the way, if you think this is cool and you're having fun, make sure to subscribe to my channel on YouTube. I make videos like this all the time, and you're not going to want to miss the outcome of the improved grading process when I release my Hobbit grades starting tomorrow. So make sure you're subscribed. Okay, so that was Panther Pounce. There's another C- that I got right on the money. I just jittered the dots a little so you could see how many there are. And that one is Kingpin's Enforcers. Let's see what I had to say about that. There's no super close analog of this card, but the one that it made me think of more than any other was Ahriman from Final Fantasy, a 2/2 for 2 and a black. Instead of lifelink, Ahriman has Flying Death Touch. Instead of costing 2 and a black to sacrifice a artifact or creature, it costs 3, so 3 generic. And then the benefit is the same, draw a card. I will also note, and I actually only just realized this right now while reading it out, Ahriman says sacrifice another artifact or creature. I guess Kingpin's Enforcers can sacrifice itself, which is kind of fun. I just want to pause to say, if you ever sacrifice Kingpin's Enforcers to itself, please comment. I never did that. Can it actually do that? Basically, the situation with Ahriman, and I think Ahriman is a slightly better card. It's also a 2/2 instead of a 2/3. I don't know, Flying Death Touch is pretty good. It can like stop a 6/6 in that format. Kingpin's Enforcers just has a lifelink. But Ahriman did work out to be like perfectly fine. Neither good nor bad, just right in the middle. It was a C. This also reminds me of another card from another Dave Humphreys set, Outlaws of Thunder Junction, Baron Bertrand Greywater. We've seen a lot, by the way, of like sacrifice an artifact or land, sacrifice a creature or land. Often red has this kind of effect at common, but these are more like black creatures that can sacrifice a creature or an artifact. So this is for 2, a white, and a black. So it actually costs 1 more. You get 1 more of each stat for it, 3/4 instead of 2/3. And for 2 mana, you can sacrifice a creature, artifact, draw a card, and then it has some whole other text. Anyways, this one was not really where it was at in OTJ. It was a C-, partly because that like black-white artifact sacrifice deck never seems to work out that great. But that may probably affect Kingpin's Enforcers as well. So C- for Baron Bertram, C for Ahriman. All in all, I'd walk in expecting Kingpin's Enforcers to be not that good, understated, an effect that tends to not be that powerful on creatures when we see it. So I'm going to go in expecting a C-. So again, I heard a lot of judgment being exercised. It wasn't just a straight up average of the cards. I was aware that Kingpin's Enforcers is worse than Ahriman, which I now definitely believe, having played a lot with both of them. And I think the comparison to Baron Bertram was actually maybe even better. So I'm starting to think that a lot of these judgment calls are very load bearing. Let's hear one more from among the ones where I absolutely nailed it. So that last one was Atlantean Cavalry. It is a mermaid riding a crab, which is pretty awesome. Anyways, Knights of Dol Amroth, 3/3 for 3 and a blue from Lord of the Rings. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Knights of Dol Amroth. So this is another, when you draw your second card each turn, it gets a +1/+1 counter. Typically in Limited recently, if you have to work to make an understated creature have appropriate stats, it is not going to have a high win rate. And that was certainly true of the Knights of Dol Amroth. This card got a D. The other major example of this is from Foundations, Erudite Wizard, 2 and a blue for a 2/3. When you draw your second card each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So Erudite Wizard flips the stats of Knights of Dol Amroth. It's a 2/3 instead of being a 3/2, right? 2/3 instead of a 3/2. The other thing that it's missing is Atlantean Cavalry, sorry, not Knights of Dol Amroth. Atlantean Cavalry has Vigilance. Erudite Wizard does not, but they have the same casting cost. So you are probably getting a better bargain with Atlantean Cavalry. I think a 3/2 is probably usually better than a 2/3, depending on the context, of course. Vigilance is obviously better than not having Vigilance. So Atlantean Cavalry is better than the Erudite Wizard. Erudite Wizard got a D+. So what do we think about Atlantean Cavalry? I mean, it has Vigilance. I think a 3/2 for 3 is better than a 3/3 for 4. I also think a 3/2 for 3 is better than a 2/3 for 3, and it has Vigilance. And thinking about this, I was kind of between C- or D+. Like, are those tweaks good enough to take Erudite Wizard from a D+ to a C-? Honestly, I kind of feel like no, partly because Erudite Wizard lived in a format that had like Think Twice, Refute. Some of the best cards in that set, Fleeting Distraction, were ways of drawing your second card on your turn. And even that did not make it good. And I don't see that kind of support for Atlantean Cavalry in the Marvel Superheroes card file. So I think we should probably just hew to what we've seen in the data before, not give it a bump for the various ways that it's slightly better. I think it's probably just like a D+. So a few things about that reasoning. So first of all, blue was very, very, very strong. in Marvel superheroes. So Atlantean Cavalry, probably, if blue hadn't been so strong, it would have been closer to like a D or a D minus. So I'm glad that I didn't bump it up even higher over a D plus. I might have been overrating the raw card power of this card within reason, because I was clearly very skeptical of its power level. But also, once again, I think the reasoning here plays a big role. I had a very clear why. Cards that are understated that you have to work to bring up to appropriate stats tend to be on the low end of the C spectrum all the way down to F in contemporary draft. So once again, the role of exercising judgment and reasoning after looking at the numerical grades of previous similar cards. Okay, I also called Take Up the Shield perfectly, but that's not very impressive because it's a literal reprint. I just took its grade from last time and I was correct that it would be that good this time. Now, for most cards, I was pretty close. So this shaded region, the points that are on the border of it or inside are all points where I was at most one step off of the truth, right? So this card here is a card that I expected to be a C, and then in reality, it was a C minus. Here are some cards that I thought would be C pluses. In reality, they were Cs, and so on. Cards that fall under this line are cards where my expectation was much higher than reality. In other words, these are cards that I thought would be much better than they actually were. By and large, I overestimated the quality of cards. I graded too high on most cards, so that's something that I'm going to take into the Hobbit. Lesson number 2, I should grade a little bit more harshly, actually. So let's start tracking our lessons. Lesson number 1 was I should exercise independent judgment. It seemed to be going well, and not just average the scores of similar cards in the past. Number 2, I should be a little bit harsher. However, about exactly 11 out of 31 cards were one step off. Either I thought they were a fraction of a letter grade higher than they actually were, or lower than they actually were. I'm talking, I thought it would be a B minus, it was actually a C plus. I thought it would be a B plus, it was actually B, and so on. Add those 11 that are one step off to the 5 that are on the nose, and I actually got more than half of the cards either right on the nose or the smallest gradation off. It's not half a letter grade exactly. It's C to C plus, C to C minus, C plus to D minus. C minus to D plus. You see what I'm saying? One step off on this axis. Then there were another 8 cards out of the 31 that were 2 steps off. So that leaves 7 out of 31, or between a fifth and a quarter of the data set, where I was a full letter grade off or more. So let's dig into some of those biggest failures. I've labeled a bunch of them on the plot. So the ones where I most underestimated their actual strength were Wakandan Drone Flock and Giant-Sized Flying Ant, which I can already tell you kind of why that is. Azorius was so strong that weak-looking blue and white creatures ended up performing a lot better than you might have thought in advance. On the other hand, maybe I should have been able to predict that, right? Part of the reason that Azorius was so strong was it had all of these flying creatures, and those were 2 of the flying creatures that turned out to be, perfectly good in Azorius. Okay, so let's pick one of those. I'm going to go with Giant-Sized Flying Ant, and let's see why I got it so wrong. All right, next up, Giant-Sized Flying Ant, a 3/2 for 3 and a blue, flash flying. When it enters, choose one. Tap target non-land permanent or untap target non-land permanent. So you flash in this 3/2 flying, you can tap or untap a permanent for 4 mana. So we just saw a card a lot like this in Lorwyn Eclipsed, Glimmermite, a 2/2 for 2 and a blue, flash flying. When it enters, choose one, tap target creature or untap target creature. One difference is it only hit creatures, not non-land permanents. That's just one thing to flag. If you're used to playing with Glimmermite, your giant-sized flying ant is actually more flexible. However, it comes at a really big cost. It's a 3/2 for 4 instead of being a 2/2 for 3. Now, Glimmermite was in an archetype that really did not work in Lorwyn Eclipse, so the win rate suffered for that. It was a D+, but I actually found it a very good, highly optional card, and in Sealed, it actually, I think, was a lot better. However, Giant-Sized Flying Ant just seems so much worse to me than Glimmermite. A 3/2 for 4 is a really hard stat line to rescue. So I would go into this expecting D+ would be a good outcome for the Giant-Sized Flying Ant, would not be surprised to see it landing at D. So that's kind of painful to listen back to, but I don't think that I was that wrong in the spirit of it. I mean, you see a card that just did pretty badly. and a card that honestly I had really high hopes for going into Lorwyn, because I kind of hoped the whole fairies thing would actually be playable because it looked really fun. Then it wasn't, and Glamormite really suffered for that. And so you look at a version of a card that just disappointed you that is clearly even worse, right? I mean, a 3/2 for 4, I'd usually rather have a 2/2 for 3 than a 3/2 for 4, right? And so then you kind of think, well, I don't want to get stung by this same kind of card all over again. Probably it's just even worse, but why don't I be optimistic and think it's kind of the same? So I think my reasoning made sense, but on the other hand, I clearly underrated how much the archetype mattered, because the reason Glamormite was bad is because it was for an archetype that did not exist, the fairies deck. Technically, you could also put it in the elementals deck or the merfolk deck, but the creature types mattered so much in that set, a tribal set, that it was just like really out of place in there. It was better in sealed, where synergy is lower, which really points to how the placement of it in the draft set made it a lot worse. On the other hand, Giant Size Flying Ant is just a 3-power flyer in a set where flying blue creatures were really good. So I'm going to take 2 more lessons for this. Number 1 is I should grade every card in the set, because if I don't, I'm not getting a complete picture of the archetypes. It takes a lot longer, I'll tell you, having prepped some of these Hobbit videos, but it's just important if I want to get accurate grades out of it. By not looking at the whole Marvel card file, I didn't even have an opportunity to guess how good blue-white would be. Then the 4th lesson I'm taking is I should have more than one example, because that's going to make the system much more robust to variations in a specific archetype. Glamormite fell in strength because fairies didn't work out or just basically didn't exist in that format. Giant Size Flying Ant average with Glamormite is going to give you a much more accurate picture about where a future creature is going to land. And one other thing that I want to say about this card, I actually think I was a bit too pessimistic about the strength of a 3/4 flash 3/2 flash flyer for 4. Wind Drake, a 2/2 for 3 flying, has been a pretty unwinning archetype recently, or a stat line recently, so I should not be bullish on how good Glamormite is as a vanilla kind of stat line creature. Or, you know, the template of pairing that stat line with an evergreen keyword, 2/2 for 3 flying, not that good. 3 power in the air actually can kill a person, and this is a very ancient draft lesson from whenever I first started drafting 20 years ago. 3 powers in the air is never a terrible card. Obviously, they can cost it so that it gets bad, but no matter how expensive it was, it needs an answer. It's a 7-turn clock for an opponent at full health on its own. It eventually needs an answer. So I actually think I whiffed a little bit on evaluating the raw card strength. Okay, we're going to do 2 more. These are the ones that really make me groan. So there are 3 red cards that I way underappreciated the terribleness of or overestimated the strength of. Blazing Crescendo, Super Speed, and Visions of Love. These are victims of red being terrible in the format, right? Red was far and away the weakest archetype in this set, one of the weakest colors that we've seen in any recent limited format. Maybe there are 2 or 3 formats that functionally had 4 competitive colors the way that this one did. So this was a huge anomaly, and it makes sense that I missed really badly on red cards. I bet a lot of people did. But I do want to dig into the why a little bit. So Blazing Crescendo is not that interesting. It was a straight up reprint. I thought it would be really good B- level because it was printed in Phyrexia All Will Be One. That format, the actually secret kind of best deck was the red-green oil deck, which was highly aggressive. And then there was also a kind of red-white aggro deck that was perfectly fine. And both of them could use Blazing Crescendo really nicely to push damage, but especially the oil deck. So Blazing Crescendo is just uniquely good in that format. There was no such thing going on in this format. So it went from B- all the way down to D+. So beware a little bit of reprints. If red had been awesome in Marvel and white had suffered, maybe Blazing Crescendo would have been the B- and Take Up the Shield would have been all the way down there at D+. Anyways, let's look at Super Speed and Visions of Love. These 2 are right next to each other in the video, so I'll just play Super Speed and then Visions of Love. The fact that you can flash it in to give something first strike on defense is kind of cool. Sorry, I need to like remove my video for the first time that you see this card, so you can really clearly see what the card looks like. So now that you've had a good view, I'll show you the card that it reminds me of the most. Military Discipline, 1 white, flash, enchant creature. When it enters the battlefield, enchant a creature gains first strike until end of turn. Sorry, I didn't mean to reveal the score yet. It gains first strike. It gets +0, but notably it does not get haste. So Military Discipline is actually just strictly worse than Super Speed. I mean, it's in a different color, but other than that, you know, enchanted creature gains first strike and +0, but it's just missing a piece. So Super Speed is a better version of Military Discipline from Brothers War. And we just saw Military Discipline was a C+ card. It also reminds me of Fire Rim form from Dragonstorm Tarkir, although this card's definitely worse. 1 and a red, flash enchant creature. When it enters, enchanted creature gains first strike until end of turn, and the creature gains +2/+0, but also does not gain haste. So I definitely think super speed is better, largely because it costs 1 mana instead of 2, which is a big difference for a combat trick like this. I don't know how important haste is going to be. Haste and first strike are kind of at odds with each other, but I guess it means you can like put something down and allow it to attack immediately, even into a similarly sized blocker. Anyways, Fire Rim form was not very good, D+, but I do think it's a notably worse card. With super speed, it's actually better than Military Discipline. I don't know how much better though. I would like lean towards C+. You know, I wouldn't take too seriously the D+ of Fire Rim form, which I think is a substantially worse card, but I also don't know that haste is going to be worth bumping it all the way up into the B level range, so I'd lean towards C+ here probably. Okay, last red card before we move on to blue, and then finally Artifact. So in red, we have Vision of Love, 1 and a red for an instant. You may sacrifice an artifact or discard a card. If you do, draw 2 cards. I wanted to be really strict with this one. I could list a trillion, as I mentioned before, a trillion different red commons that we've seen recently that let you sacrifice like a land or an artifact or something dirtily and draw 2. But I wanted to just draw one comparison to a very similar card, Abandon Attachments. This was one for a blue or red hybrid, and it lets you discard a card, and if you do, draw 2 cards. So Vision of Love lets you sacrifice an artifact or discard a card, and then you draw 2 cards. Abandon Attachments, you only get to discard a card, so you don't have the sack and artifact option. I'll also say Abandon Attachments was a little bit better. A very important part of this card was that it was a lesson, so it was better in this way that it had a relevant type, which Vision of Love does not have. Having said all of that, so, you know, Vision of Love is more flexible, but missing a relevant type. And also its mana are more stringent. It's just 1 and a red instead of 1 and a blue or red hybrid. Having said that, Abandoned Attachments was perfectly fine, C-level card. Vision of Love is better in some ways and worse in some ways, so yeah, maybe it balances out to a C. I also think this is a kind of card that people underestimate. So if you would think of this card as like a D+ or a D, something you're kind of avoiding putting in your deck, it's probably perfectly fine before we know anything about the set. Well, after we know something about the set, it is not fine. It is a F-level card right along super speed. But I think the reason is very simple. Like, listening to that reasoning, it wasn't preposterous. But I do think that this goes back to lesson 3, that I need to judge every card to get a sense for the relative strength of each archetype. Because why did super speed and Vision of Love suck so much compared to where I thought they would land? I don't think it's that I was completely wrong about their raw card strength. I think it's just that red was so far behind overall, it could not afford to be doing little stuff. If you had a red deck that was doing little things like discarding a card to draw some cards and sacrificing something to shape your hand a little bit, to give something +1/+0 and first strike, like that was not where it was at. Super speed also, you know, the number of bounce effects was probably very punishing. Probably your creatures are already so much smaller than their creatures and less impactful that even getting a trade with a creature and going 1-for-1 in a surprise move with a super speed was not useful. I actually never saw that happen in the whole format. And also like playing a super speed onto your creature and then having them play a Trickster's stratagem or even a Justice and just bounce the creature, or even if you're snapping up a hero in training that already drew them a card and then you're not even catching up by getting rid of it with your super speed, that's like a 2-for-1 against you already. So it's really just that white and blue were pushed so far that these red decks that were wasting space on this kind of air just had absolutely no hope. So this just underscores for me that to avoid these really big misses, I need to incorporate the strength of the colors somehow. One thing I tried to do was see if maybe I could take the average grade that I gave the cards and weight according to that. So these vertical lines show the median grade that I gave to cards in this color. And my median grades put green, red, and white. I've jittered them so you can see it, but these actually all have the same exact median, which is C. So green, red, and white were indistinguishable up at the top. Red feels really bad, but white and green was the second best color pair. So yeah, I'm not like that far off. I mean, red was very far off, but, and then blue and then black. I mean, I don't know how green fits into all this, but that's probably about where you would line things up, like white on top, then green and blue together maybe, then black, then red. But if I had adjusted by this median, so if I had said all the black cards are now going to get shifted down a little bit because it looks like black is systematically the worst, maybe all the green, red, white ones are going to get shifted up a little bit and I'm not going to touch the blue ones, something like that, then in that case, I actually would not really have gotten closer to the truth, I don't think, because I would have improved red and not touch blue, which was actually good. So this just points to I need to grade all the cards and see how the chips fall. One last thing, I do know, I'll make this disclaimer more clearly up front tomorrow, but I can already hear people clamoring to tell me. So I just want to point out, I'm very well aware that this treats every card as kind of an atomic unit and ignores the synergy, which is obviously a huge part of what's interesting about Magic and what determines card strength. This is kind of step one of this method. Like I'm trying to get break the card down to its essentials and get kind of close to understanding its power level by using individual card comparisons. That's step one of the method. Fast forward, a few sets as I like hone and refine the method, and I'll try to figure out ways to bring synergy in. So like this plot over here is a simple way of doing that, just taking like the average individual strength of cards. But then, you could do something like say, okay, every card, so it's like this recruit mechanic that I'll be talking about tomorrow when I grade Hobbit cards. Maybe you think recruit is like a really strong mechanic compared to some other green mechanic or something. Then you might say, okay, every card with recruit, I'm going to bump up a little. Every card with that green mechanic, I'm going to bump down a little. So that's where we'll get to eventually. Right now, I'm just trying to figure out like tuning the knobs on getting the individual card strengths roughly correct. And hopefully any big misses because of synergy will understand that it's because of synergy, and it'll teach us how to incorporate it in future ratings. So again, if you thought this was cool, make sure that you're subscribed and stay tuned for tomorrow's video when I'm going to apply these 4 lessons to make hopefully even more accurate grades for the Hobbit. And you know what, on Marvel, look, clearly I thought red was going to be a lot stronger than it was, but getting more than half of the cards to within the smallest fraction of a letter grade, like thinking it's a C- when it was actually a C, thinking it was a D- when it was actually a D, getting more than half of the cards to that accuracy. I'm pretty proud of that for my first attempt, but let's see if we can't do better next time. So until tomorrow, have tons of fun playing Magic and don't be afraid to splash.